Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our webinar on cybersecurity and compliance. We'll be discussing things you can be doing right now to protect your business and your customers. I'm Sue Brzee, the Marketing Director here at 2W Technologies, and will be your moderator today. But anytime during the presentation today you have questions, you can send them through the question box on the screen, and there'll be an interactive Q&A at the end. We'll try to get to all your questions then. Today's presenters are going to be Mark Jameson, who is the President and CEO at 2W Tech, and Joshua Schultz, who is our IT Service Manager at 2W Tech and our resident security guru. For those of you who might not be familiar with us, 2W Tech is a technology service provider and Epicor value-added reseller. We offer Microsoft Cloud, cybersecurity, data analytics, and IT infrastructure solutions. We are both an Epicor and a Microsoft Gold partner. Mark, why don't you get us started?
Hey, thanks, Sue. Everybody, thanks for joining us, taking a couple of minutes out of your day to talk about this really important subject. I'm here with Josh. He runs the security group here at 2W, and boy, you can't look at a news feed anymore without looking at some hack or some security breach, and it's top of mind. It's important. Your business is under attack every day, and so what we're going to do today is we're going to try to put together just kind of a list for you to do, for you to check on, to make sure that you're doing the best you can. This is kind of the low-hanging fruit that we see on a regular basis, and so what we're going to do is we're going to start with zero trust, what that means, and kind of the whole change to the way that the bad actors are starting to attack your, trying to attack your business. So Josh, traditionally it was all about how do I protect my infrastructure and my network, and now that's starting to change. You there? Can you hear me? Josh? We can't
Absolutely,
hear you,
Mark. So when we talk about zero trust, I can hear you. Yeah. So our goal with zero trust is to make sure that we have an environment that we're not just protecting the infrastructure anymore. We're really coming to a place where we have infrastructure independent users, people who are out there who might have a phone that they're bringing in and might have a laptop that they're bringing in that is going to present a weakness and an attack vector for a threat actor to come into an environment. So we're really going from looking at infrastructure protection, where we talk about protecting your network, your PCs, your servers, which is still important, mind you, but we're also extending that out to what user rights do people have? What kind of verification are we using to make sure that these are the correct devices that they're using, and this is actually who they say they are in this situation here.
So real briefly, real briefly, let's talk about zero trust. So what is, because it's a word that's out there. It's I know it's a path. It's not something that you implement. But just real briefly, what is zero trust?
Absolutely. So zero trust is the concept of not trusting either your device that's talking to someone or the device that's talking back. So we want to mutually identify ourselves and mutually secure it. So say, for instance, we've got a server that traditionally hosts files. We want to make sure that we're actually talking to that server that we own, and that it's the right server. And the server wants to go back to us and say, oh, are you who you say you are? Are you certain? How do you verify that we are having that mutual trust there? And when we talk about zero trust, we are developing a framework where we can say, you know what, even if my server gets compromised, my computer won't talk to it because it's got a set of settings and has a set of protections to it that it won't leak information. And then the other way around. So if the server is okay and your endpoint isn't, it's got to make sure that this endpoint gets cleaned somehow or is protected in some way, shape, or form, that even if they do get compromised, the things that a user has rights to aren't leaked and they aren't exposed in some way, shape, or form.
Okay, so let's talk about the changes in the attack profile. And
absolutely,
the way it used to be. We'll talk about the way it is now. Just kind of walk us through that.
So right now what we have is we have a more traditional attack profile. We've got a factory environment and we've got a corporate office. An attacker traditionally has looked at both of those locations as targets. So they're mainly going after your physical infrastructure, your big corporate buildings. And that's how a traditional attacker would look at things. They would look at things like, hey, what is your remote desktop server? Is there something that's exposed on the internet that really connects back to it? Do you have a file sharing port open or something like that? They're really looking at what your infrastructure used to be. So they're looking for where your physical places are, and is looking to compromise the things that are held inside of those buildings.
So the changes has been, right, everybody went home, our attack profile got bigger. Just talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that.
Yeah, so our network edge has now, you see that we still have the business there, we still have our physical buildings, but now we have everything that's connected to it. We have people that are remoting in, you've got, accountants that are working from home. We've got people who don't physically need to be in the building anymore, but they're still integral to your business. So you still have to have them have access to information. So all of a sudden our attackers go, oh, that's awesome for me, because now my attack surface moves from just two locations and two things that are typically under tight corporate control. Now our attack surface is everything and everywhere. We've got clouds on there because our SaaS platforms can definitely be under attack. We've got homes and businesses that we're communicating through and communicating from. So over our attack surface has just exploded. And what we want to do is we want to figure out, how do I best protect myself even with this new, much more broad attack surface now.
It was really the panacea for the bad actors when we pushed everybody home, because there was a ton of unsecured PCs and laptops that were VPNing directly into networks, and we saw a real big spike in this exact situation. But Josh, the real question on everybody's mind is, well, how come hackers always wear hoodies?
Honestly, they're comfortable. It really is. You're sitting down in the basement and it's nice and cold. Put on a hoodie, you're fine. You're set. Doesn't matter what temperature it is. You're comfortable.
You're good to know. Okay, so let's get to the meat of this thing. So the first thing we want to do right now on your network is we want to implement multi-factor authentication. Now, everybody tells me multi-factor authentication is a gigantic pain in the rear. It's tough on the users. It's tough to implement. What say you?
I would disagree with that. I would say that multi-factor authentication doesn't have to be onerous. It doesn't have to always prompt you at the worst times. It doesn't have to be a situation where it interrupts your day-to-day basis, you on a daily basis, like 50 or 60 times. You're not always going back to your phone. What we have the ability to do is we have the ability to set up multi-factor authentication in such a way that, like, say, maybe if you're at work, you don't have to use multi-factor authentication, or maybe we should have that remember this device or remember me option available to us on those devices. So we go from I have to protect absolutely every single transaction with another factor to, what, we extended that trust. We had that zero trust. We figured out, hey, I can actually trust this computer now. Let's make sure that that user that's talking to it is the right user, they're authorized to it, and then we'll put a token on that device and we'll have that remembered. So it's not every time that I'm accessing Outlook or going to office.com or something like that I'm going to get prompted for multi-factor authentication anymore. It's really going to be
it's what is the device, where am I coming from, IP address, that kind of thing. We can lock that down, so we're not constantly getting that multi-factor prompt.
Correct. Yeah, we're going from hey, how many connections is this thing doing, to what is this user's behavior? Do they typically log in from this location? Is this a brand new location? Did they log in once in Arizona and then they try to log in Milwaukee 20 minutes later? That should raise a flag, because it's really actually impossible right now to travel that fast. So we want to make sure that we highlight those situations, and only in those situations do we really want to increase the security and say, hey, let's take a step back and make sure you are who you say you are.
Well, and to your point about making it easy, here at 2W, our multi-factor authentication, I literally just look at my phone through the authentication app, and it recognizes my face, and then I'm authenticated into wherever I'm trying to get to. So it can be set up, and it can be set up relatively simple for the end users, which is the big key.
Yeah.
So number two is update your firewall. So the firewall is the most important part of your network. It is the It's the piece of equipment that keeps everybody, all the bad actors in the worldwide nasty web out of your business and away from your people. And we see all the time firewalls that are just they're in awful shape. They're end of life. They're not patched. You got to patch those too, right, Josh? Just like you do everything else.
Absolutely. So just like Windows has to, have an update that comes through once a month, there are firewalls that do get security updates. It's not once a month. It tends to be once every couple of months. But keeping those up to date is critically important. Even though we talked about the edge moving and the attack surface moving away from just the corporate hub, the corporate hub is still where you have the majority of your files. It's still where you have the majority of your information. So making sure that your firewall is up to date and safe allows us and enables us to do a lot of other things. Worst thing in the world is coming to an environment and looking at their firewall and saying, oh, this has been out of support for 3 years, and based on the vulnerabilities that have come out, people can just come in and connect to your network, just like they have an authorized VPN, even if they are a threat actor. So having an up-to-date firewall that is in support and is kept up to date is very, very important.
Well, and we see that all the time, and it's easy to forget. It sits there in the closet, and it just works. It doesn't go down like a server might, or something like that, and so it is easy to forget. The other thing is when you come to replace it, spend the extra money, get a managed professional grade firewall, not a consumer grade, not something you'd put in your house, because that's super important to be able to configure exactly what you're trying to accomplish with your firewall, and who you're letting in and who you're keeping out, and who you want to be able to get out of your network to access websites and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of times you hear news stories about, oh, this attacker has a botnet of 15 million devices, or this is an attacker that is going to compromise everyone's device that's connected to a router or something like that. There have been lots of situations where the consumer grade routers have vulnerabilities that are present that enable a very easy takeover of those devices. So you can be silently passing information to threat actors, to Russia, to China, and now that consumer grade router is now looked at as an endpoint for that attacker to be able to utilize to put into place denial of service attacks or data exfiltration. So having a professional firewall makes that process so much more difficult, because there's a lot of hardening procedures and a lot of technical due diligence that firewall vendors will do for a professional firewall that they won't do for a personal firewall.
Yeah,
Bad as that sounds.
it's a little more money, but it's absolutely critical to protecting your business. So everybody's favorite, number 3, passwords.
Yes, we definitely want to make sure that we have the correct password. We call them password protection policies, but all it is making sure that we have password policies that are sufficient and they provide the correct amount of complexity to an environment. A lot of times people think that, oh, I'm going to put in a password policy and I'm going to require complexity. When that means is that they've got to have a capital letter, they've got to have a number in it, then they've got to have a symbol in it. Well, if you're a new hire and you're coming on board, your password could be welcome 2020 exclamation point or 2021 exclamation point, right? And now that password, because it fits all the complexity rules, starts to change. So we go from welcome 2021 to welcome spring 2021, welcome fall 2021, or something like that, or welcome 2022, because it's easy. It's based off of what they remember and what they know, and it fits all the complexity rules.
So the new thing is so instead of some esoteric 16 character ASCII dump type password, it's to use passphrases. So talk a little bit about passphrases. They're easier to remember. It's something that you can whether it's your favorite song or your favorite movie title or something, right?
Yeah, so we go from a collection of random numbers and letters or something very simple like welcome 2021 to a passphrase. In this case right here, we've got a passphrase, Mary had a little lamb. So that's much longer than what people usually put in for passwords, which is critically important, but it is easy to remember because all of a sudden, instead of having all of these different things to remember, we just say, oh, I've got the pattern. My pattern is Mary had a little lamb. and I know I have a substitution in there, and its first letter's capital. Well, it doesn't really just have to be Mary Had a Little Lamb. There's lots of really song lyrics or phrases or sayings that people can make as their passwords. Our point is to make the passphrase, which is a longer password that's easier to remember, and make it so you have to change it less often.
Song lyrics are a great one. Your favorite song lyrics, your favorite line from a movie. Those are all really, really great. Those are really great passphrases. The other thing that we don't see very often, and this is all about, we're going to talk about this in just a second, but in some detail, but you need to make sure that you are requiring your employees to have a unique password for work only. So a lot of people have kind of the same password phrase, it's my cat's name and the year and something else that occurs. And then I use that across all of my passwords on my shopping sites and everything else. And I'm using it for work, or I'm using some derivative of that for work. You absolutely have to require your employees to have a unique password that is used strictly for your business, that they use nowhere else. That will help this reverse engineering, because there was a study done, and they looked at 15 billion passwords, and they found out that only 12% of those 15 billion were unique, and all the rest were password 123 and spring 2021 or whatever it happens to be. A lot of them had birth year, the year the password was created, some special year, the year your kids were born, or or a relative, or your children, or your pet's name. And the whole key to this is that can easily be reverse engineered out of social media. So all of this stuff, your birth year, your the year the password was created, your pet's names, all that stuff sits on Facebook.
Yeah, think about it, because I know maybe I'm a little bit different because I'm a little bit younger, but whenever I go to a new job, I always say, hey, started here at this date. Well, that's a great piece of information that fills out like 40% of these fields that we're talking about here. This might seem a little bit sort of well, why do we have to have multi-factor authentication if we're just going to say, hey, we have to have unique passwords and we have to have passphrases that are so long? Why do we need to have that? And what we're implementing here is something called defense in depth. So it's basically what it sounds like. So you've got lines of defense, so that way if something happens to the first line, there's another line to back it up. You've got another line to back that up. So we just make it much, much more harder for a threat actor to compromise our systems if we have everything in depth and everything lined up correctly. Our goal here is to make our house a lot harder to get into than the guy next door.
Yeah, because that's really the key, right? It's just like it's like your house at home, right? I don't have to have Fort Knox in my house. I just have to make it harder to break into than the guy down the street.
Absolutely.
All right, number 4, utilize next generation antivirus. This is kind of a new thing. It's behavioral based, not code based. Josh, walk us through what is next generation antivirus.
Yeah. So as we had talked about earlier, the traditional corporate infrastructure has changed over time, where we go from having a core business that's in one place to having an edge that's expanded out. Well, just like that, there's a very similar race and a very similar change in behaviors for threat actors and the malicious code that they utilize. Traditionally, they were able to say, you know what, let me just make something like the I love you virus or something like that, right? Where you have one executable that attacks and is able to compromise all of these different businesses. Now, over time, what has happened is that it's gone from this one executable, this one program that is a defined piece of code, to being something that is now unique per client or per workstation or per person that a threat actor is really trying to compromise. So as this change happens and goes over time, our traditional detection mechanisms that were only focused on identifying that program, that piece of code, need to be changed, and we need to start looking at things holistically. We need to look at your behaviors. We need to look at what is that program doing on the endpoint. A lot of times, for instance, we have something like PowerShell. PowerShell is used in a lot of system automation tools, but it can also be used to actually implement like something like a coin miner or a ransomware attack just by utilizing what's already on the system. Well, your traditional antivirus isn't going to take care of it, but next generation antivirus, endpoint detection and response, they're going to see a change in behavior, change in what that executable is going to do, and they're really going to lock it down.
So it'll look at it and it'll know that Josh doesn't log in from Australia very often, and it might raise its hand and stop it. Or this is an action that doesn't occur on this network or on this machine. Maybe we need to just stop the action until some human approves it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
For instance, we had an alert come through earlier today because we do implement next generation antivirus, endpoint detection and response, where one of our backup servers updated the backup program on a server. So we had an abnormal connection where someone was dropping a file and trying to execute it, and ADR was like, "Hey, this is not normal. This looks like an attack. What do you want to do?" So even though it was a known good action, the activities that were taken and the executables that were used were non-unique, but the behaviors were indicative of an attack. And that's really what we really want to start protecting against, is behaviors of attack.
All right, yeah. So number 5, we have 7, by the way, is secure remote access. So we've got all these people, they're spread out all over the place, and they're all remoting back into the mothership, and sometimes it can be a mess.
Yeah, so we definitely want to go back to the concept of having defense in depth. Just like we have multi-factor authentication on all of our passwords to access things like Outlook and your Office applications, we need to have multi-factor authentication on your VPNs. There was a little story a couple of months ago called about the Colonial Pipeline hack. People might have heard about it. It was really a good case example of a firewall that was out of date, a VPN access that was forgotten about, that they did not have multi-factor authentication on it. And the combination of those two things just made that is an attack surface that someone's going to look at, and they're really going to attack that, and they're going to try and gain access to that piece of infrastructure, because they know that if I can access a VPN endpoint, I'm going to be getting into the middle of their systems. I'm going to be right where I can access all their ERP, their file shares, their Active Directory infrastructure. If I can compromise a VPN, I can do a lot of that thing.
If you have an insecure remote access point, they will find it. We look at, when we do network evaluations all the time, the amount of pings and hits to a firewall is, I mean, thousands a day. It's not uncommon.
Absolutely. When we think about the kind of the internet and the environment that the internet is, it's kind of a shift, but there's a reason that we have firewalls. It's there to protect things that are automatically scanning on the internet. A firewall is just a fancy way to say a traffic filter. We want to make sure that we have only good traffic coming in there. When we have things like open firewall ports and ways and holes through it to access something like our traditional RDS infrastructure, that is not only a path for good traffic to go through, it also opens up a small attack surface that they want to go ahead and they want to attack. So when we talk about making sure that we have remote access being secured, I want to make sure that we have the least amount of firewall ports open as possible, and we really want to move away from our traditional RDS infrastructure. Although there are ways to secure a remote desktop access point, there are things like RDS farms, and there's secure web access. There's a lot better solutions available to us now, and one of those would be the Azure Virtual Desktop or Windows 365, as Microsoft just announced. So what we do in that case is we take the load of securing that traffic really away from that firewall, and we put that on Microsoft's back. We say, all right, Microsoft, you see a lot more traffic than a traditional enterprise does. They analyze all that traffic, and they want to make sure that all that traffic gets secured. So inside of the Azure Virtual Desktop environment, all that traffic is going to be benign. It's going to be looked at as safe, and it's going to be secured. So now our dispersed workforce, which used to VPN in everywhere, doesn't have to establish a VPN anywhere. We don't have to worry about their workstation and what they visited 2 weeks ago and whether or not that has a virus because they're using their home computer, because it's really hard to get computers nowadays. With Azure Virtual Desktop, all that gets abstracted away and we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, see, and just that piece of it alone from an operational standpoint is huge. It's a great tool for temporary employees, remote employees, bring your own device employees. If you want to use, I use Azure Virtual Desktop to access a lot of applications through my iPad, which typically is no further than a couple of feet from me at any given moment during the day. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, and it is super secure. It's a really great tool, and you should look into it. It's well worth. It'd be well worth the half an hour or so to have a conversation with somebody here at 2W about Azure Virtual Desktop.
One thing that I will say, closing comment on Azure Virtual Desktop, is that it's not just for executives or people who work traditionally in the office. We can absolutely enable Azure Virtual Desktop to have a video card in it and enable all your CAD drawings and your CAD engineers to work from Azure Virtual Desktop in a high-speed, secure environment.
So you're not moving. You're not moving all that stuff. You're not having to move all that stuff through your home internet connection or anything else, because really you're just passing pictures essentially, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. We could probably do a whole webinar on just Azure Virtual Desktop. Clean up Active Directory. So every time we go into a network, somebody says, "Hey, I need you to come in here. I want you to look at my network." The Active Directory is always a mess. And it creates a huge security hole, because it is the rights that the Active Directory is the thing that manages the rights for your people. It looks at it and it says, okay, Mark can see these files, or he can print to these devices, or whatever it happens to be. So what's the first thing you should look at, Josh, when we look at Azure?
First thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we have the appropriate people inside of Active Directory. So the temporary employee that came in, that intern that was here, why is their account still active? What rights do they have? Because that intern might be touching 4 different departments to make sure that people are onboarded correctly. They're running people's copies and stuff like that. So that person, that identity, has those rights. When we want to make sure that we're cleaning up Active Directory, we want to get rid of those. There's no reason to have an account that's available for use that no one's going to be using anymore. It presents a hole that an attacker can access. They can leverage that hole to compromise the rest of your infrastructure. This is why we talk about defense in depth, right? We start with multi-factor authentication that closes out the external access. We have complex passwords. Well, maybe your intern doesn't follow all the rules. Maybe they have a very simple password or something like that. So even though it might just be a lowly intern, they still have an account. They still have rights to access things within your network, and that's really what an attacker is going to try and utilize.
So we see this all the time: is ex-employees that are still active in Active Directory, and their passwords are set to never expire. I mean, you could have somebody in your network right now, and you would never know it, utilizing one of these profiles. So go through, check it out. Usually what happens is you don't, somebody leaves the company. You don't turn that person off from the Active Directory right away, because you're still trying to access their file shares or their email or whatever it happens to be. And then eventually you just forget about it. And once you, and that's why we see all these, or you sunset a PC. Somebody got a new laptop. That old laptop is still part of the Active Directory, and nobody decommissioned that laptop. So we see that stuff. It's not super difficult to clean up, but it is something you need to do, and you should probably check it on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
And number 7 is check your backups. Check your backups.
Yeah.
Every time
Even though
go ahead, Josh.
I would say, like, even though it is like the last on our list right now, it is one of the most critical pieces. When we talk about having a environment that gets ransomed or that is somewhat vulnerable, one of the things that we look at and make sure and check the health on it, because it's critically important, is the backups. The ransomware attacker, it's going to be hard pressed to get money out of you if you could say, you know what, I can restore my backup with one click. It's a much different conversation that you have. Like, you don't even need to engage them, because you're just like, you know what, forget it, doesn't matter. We'll take this downtime, we'll reevaluate what we've got, and we'll restore from backup, and we won't lose any data. It's very important that we have both on-premise and off-premise backups that are automatically taken care of and they're automatically validated. We have lots of clients that are in tornado country, hurricane country, fire country, or even flood country, where we've got these areas and these server rooms that have critical data on them because they maintain your ERP systems, they've got all of your file shares on them, they've got your engineering drawings on them. What happens if there's a fire that comes through and just all of a sudden your server room's gone? You don't have any access to it anymore. Everything that was in that room is now disappeared. Your backups, that's kind of the situation that your backups come into play, and having automated offsite and verified backups is very, very important. So it's not just can I get ransomware, it's also, am I protected from every act of God?
And yeah, we've had that. We had a client not that many months ago whose roof collapsed. Excuse me, and the entire server. The water came in and filled all the servers up with water, and servers don't like to be filled up with water, obviously.
Yeah, you could literally lift up the server and watch the water pour out the back of it. That was not a fun situation.
Yeah, but they were lucky. They had file and image level backups, so we were able to spin them up and get them at least get them back into production, because really that's the key, is how fast can we get you back into production? How fast can we do that? So it's image level as well as file level, as well as automated, as well as off-prem, is really kind of your magic key to making sure, and that you can verify them.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is what we went through. So implement MFA, update your firewalls, implement complicated passwords or passphrases, invest in next-gen antivirus versus the code-based antivirus that we're all familiar with from the last 20 years. Secure remote access, clean up Active Directory, and check your backups. So, Sue, that's what we've got.
All right, great. Thanks, guys. Good presentation. All right, we're going to move to the question and answer section now. So if you have questions, you can still send them through the questions box. All right, guys, first question. What happens if I get hit with ransomware?
Well, you want to make 2 phone calls, right? The first phone call is you want to make to us. We have a whole remediation program that we focus in on getting you back up to production. And then the next phone call you want to do is you want to call your insurance company, because they're going to want to send in the cyber sleuths to figure out what happened, how that worked. Josh, talk a little bit about our rescue plan.
Yeah, so our rescue plan actually has developed over time, and it is battle tested. So it's not like we just sat down in the room and we're like, hey, how do I get a company up in production? We've tested this out. We have implemented, and we actually have rescued a couple companies from a ransomware incident, where we're able to go and ascertain that there's something going on, that there's ransomware on the environment. We are actually able to go and stop it, and then we start bringing them back into production. We say, all right, you need to contact your critical people and figure out what is the core of your business. Like, if you lost these, it doesn't matter what else we do, your business is still gone. We identify those pieces of information, and then we lift them up into a secure environment where you're able to work off of. We establish a secure enclave. It's basically the terminology, right? So if you work out of this, any information that comes out of this, we know is safe. We know this is secure. We know that a threat actor can't come in and compromise this again. And from there, we rebuild your business. We make sure that you've got your order processing up correctly. We can make sure you can fabricate these products. You can get your files back to your CNC machines. You can print your shipping labels and get them out the door. Our goal is to restore operations at minimal capacity to this environment, to a company, so that way they are able to start getting revenue back in the door as soon as possible.
And it works. And we've done, unfortunately, we tend to have a major one of these about once a quarter, and then a whole bunch of little ones along the way. So we've done this quite often, unfortunately.
Mark, do people have to be our clients to ask for our help on this stuff?
No, they don't, and we don't have to manage their networks either. In fact, the last couple of we actually just were their Epicor consultants, their ERP consultants, and so if you run into this area and you're not a 2W Tech client, it doesn't matter. You can give us a call, and we'll institute our remediation plan to try to get you back into production as quickly as we possibly can.
All right, great, thanks. Next question. How many of these 5 things, realistically, am I supposed to be able to do within my own organization versus needing someone like 2W Tech to help me with?
That's a good question. I think it depends upon your own technical acumen. But Josh, we're not talking about anything really crazy complicated here.
Yeah, so we're not saying, hey, you need this specific technology from this brand and this provider, and by the way, we're the only ones that can do that. That's not the case at all. All of this stuff is something that should be within the realm of an IT professional within their environment to be able to bring these solutions in. Then the great thing about us as a technology service provider is that even if you don't have that capability within your environment, you can come alongside us and say, hey, I want to implement multi-factor authentication. How do I do that? And we can go in and say, you know what, here, you've already licensed because you're using 365 and you've got this thing and you've got that thing. And so we can do this with just a couple hours of consulting work or something like that. And if you don't have us, we rely on industry best practices. We didn't come up with this unique way to secure your information. We're using tried and tested products and tried and tested methodologies from the industry best practices and from outside of the industry. So it can be a very low cost thing, but if you have to replace your firewall, you got to replace your firewall, and that costs money.
Yeah, and so it really depends on what you're trying to do. If you got to replace your firewall, that's going to cost you some money. If you need a new backup methodology system, that's going to cost you some money. The antivirus, that's a relatively cheap date on a per user basis. And the rest of this is just process and policies, really, and looking through and just good network and security hygiene.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question. Is Cylance an example of a next generation antivirus?
Cylance has a couple different products. It really depends on what specific package that you're utilizing. We have seen Cylance out in some environments, and they do analyze fileless malware and some behavioral things, but it really depends on exactly what package you've got. Now, like something that comes preloaded from Best Buy, that's not going to have the same level of protections as a corporate business antivirus package. But they could all fall under the same umbrella, which is why I'm specifying it really depends on what you've got purchased and how it's configured for protections.
Okay, so next question, I'm not sure, you guys kind of touched on this one with the question that was specific to how much can I do myself versus using 2W Technologies, but how much is implementing all of these things going to cost me? So I know you talked about that a little, but I don't know if you want to expand on that a little more.
Yeah, it really depends on the state of your network now. We walk into a lot of networks that look like they were just pulled from the early 2000s. You've got out-of-date firewalls. You've operating systems that are out of support. 2008 OS, Windows 7 machines. That type of stuff. So it really depends on where you are in disrepair to your network. The good news is if you haven't spent any money on your network, then think of all that money you've saved so you can spend the money on your network to get it up to date. But from there, it just super depends on what you can do yourself. and what you have here, but it's not, all of these things together, Josh, it's not a lot of money, really.
No, like a lot of this stuff is, if you're keeping your technology up to date, all it is just going to be the time to implement the new policies. If you aren't keeping your technology up to date, it's going to be a little bit of a hit.
Yeah, good MFA, for example, is the way we price it. It's a per user per monthly price. It's relatively inexpensive. The firewall is an expense that's, depending upon the size of your network, is in the high hundreds, low thousands probably. The next gen antivirus, that's a per user per month type cost. And then the backup system is in hundreds of dollars a month usually, to put a good image and file level thing. So we're not talking about a ton of dough here.
Okay, next question. I've heard ransomware can sit in the background for months before it chooses when to attack. We have the cloud backup, but how are we assured that ransomware does not get into that backup?
Well, there's two different ways, and sometimes the answer gets a little bit technical. First off, ransomware has to get on the system somehow. So if you have a next generation antivirus, endpoint detection and response, and the capabilities for detecting something like a technical word here, polymorphic ransomware, where that ransomware changes its behavior, so it changes its code based on where it lands. If you have the protection on the front end, then we know that our backups are good. Now, say if a ransomware attack happens, what you want to do is you want to have the capability inside your backup system to bring up an image inside of a protected enclave, where that's not live on your network, and you can still communicate with it, you can still talk with it, and you want to then scan those systems for that same ransomware. Because generally by the time that you've been ransomware, we can identify exactly what's going on and where did this, what strain of ransomware is this, what is that threat actor doing, and then we can look at your backups and put them into a protected environment and target that strain of ransomware. So, I mean, yeah, sure, it could be a script that's sitting in your Windows folder or somewhere in your documents, but if we bring it up in a protected environment and safe, then we can go in there and we can go after it and then clean your backups, so that way you don't get reinfected after that situation.
I tell you, Sue, let me just jump on that for a second too. Is
Sure.
a lot of times what we'll see is we'll see a bad actor in your network for an extended period of time while they systematically map your network. They systematically will try to delete the backups, the redundant files, that type of stuff. This is part of the reason why having an off-site backup is really critical, so that you don't have that happen, because they'll go in and it might be months, depending on the size of their network, and then what they'll do is then they'll just turn on the lockware, and after they've mapped everything, they've cleaned everything, there's no backups available. That's kind of the new MO, especially for larger networks, and we've seen that more than once.
Yeah, that's really why the verifiability of a backup is important. Make sure that you're backing up the correct information, that we can restore from it, and that we know that that information is good. Cool.
Okay. All right, just a couple more unless any last minute questions come in. How do these actions apply to compliances like CMMC or ITAR?
You're a compliancy guy, Josh.
That's actually a great question. A lot of times compliancy experts and people that are within the industry really look at security and compliance as being on a spectrum. So we go from having being a completely secure but uncompliant network to having a network that can be completely compliant and not secure. What we want to do is really straddle the gap for that. So all of these things that we are doing are things that are either required by compliancies or are industry best practices that help us down the path of compliancy. So implementing multi-factor authentication Sure, that sounds like something that your bank does. Well, it's also required if you want to do business with the DoD. So it's really we have to find the way that, yeah, we're not being as secure as a bank, but we can be secure enough to sell to the DoD or to work with clients who sell to the DoD or PCI or something like that. All of these are industry best practices that are encapsulated by those compliances and actually enable us to fill the gap between where you are at and where you need to go to be compliant a lot easier.
Okay, and final question. How disruptive are implementing these actions going to be to my business?
Well, again, I think it depends on what you're trying to do. A lot of this isn't. I mean, I don't know, Josh, multi-factor probably, that's going to be a user change.
Yeah, I would say multi-factor authentication and changing your password policies would be the most disruptive because they touch all of your end users. Beyond that, a lot of this stuff can be taken care of in the background. They're a matter of changing your policies and processes or implementing the correct procedures and methodologies. A lot of it can happen in the background.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Mark, do you want to advance the slide to go to your guys' contact information in case anybody has any additional questions for either Mark or Josh? You can give us a call, or their emails are up on the screen. Or if you just have any feedback on this presentation, it's always welcome. Or you can always reply to one of the reminder emails you got prior to logging on to the event. That's all we have for today. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Sue.